Okay, a proper way to fill a small hole in a piece of sheetrock. Here's the hole. Here's another one. Now these are small. You can do two things. This is just some old mud. It's quite dry, which is nice. At any rate, you put it on the hole. That seems simple enough, doesn't it? Okay, you think you're done. No, wait a minute. What will happen is if you let this mud joint compound dry, it will dry flat. It's going to have a different gloss than the painted sheetrock. So what you do, since it's just a little pinhole, you take a wet rag and you rub it, and look, it all disappears. And so yes, you will have a tiny little hole, but nobody's going to see it. And you don't have to touch it up. Because I don't care how good of if you got the match for the paint, this wall, after a certain length of time, is going to be dingy, and you put some brand new paint on it, you're going to have a little spot. Also the gloss and the type of, if it's flat, semi-gloss, the gloss will change over time. You put some fresh paint on there, you put fresh paint on top of dry paint, this little spot that you just touched up is going to be a little bit glossier, and it's going to be noticeable. This is a rent house, so, you know, we try to keep it simple. And as you notice, there's a whole bunch of little holes everywhere. And if you had just put the joint compound on, you'd have a big spot here, big spot there, big spot everywhere. And this is a way to simplify. Now, here's another example. In this example, there were a whole series of holes, probably about 20. And what I did is I went ahead and I took joint compound and I spackled it on and I pulled it. Now we're going to have to go and texture this, and I'll show you that here in a second, because look at the texture here. You put joint compound on here, the texture, you basically float it over the texture, and it's going to look weird when you paint it. So we're going to spray a little spray texture in this spot only to try to match this sheetrock. Now these holes are much bigger. They're probably too big just to fill it. We can try it, but we're going to have to pop out these anchors. I hate these anchors. You can't leave them in. You have to pop these out, and then it's going to be a big hole, and then we're going to have to take a piece of tape and cover it up. Same with here. We actually charge the tenants for doing this because it is, I mean, it's beyond normal wear and tear. They put up probably some curtains of their own, and these holes are too big also. We're going to have to pop. All right, here's the cordless drill. Much better. Much better. Okay, so that's the best way to take these things out. As you notice, leaves a pretty big hole. I would save these. They are actually really clever little devices. They hold something like 50 pounds, one of these anchors. So yeah, that's pretty buggered up. We've removed the two anchors and we have some pretty big holes. We're going to take a piece of this mesh. It's tape joint. It's tape for joints, and it's that fiber material, much nicer because it goes on thinner. It also goes on without first application, so this is almost trying to skip a step. And in a patch job, getting it ready, we don't have a whole lot of time to come back 2 or 3 days in a row, if you will, so we're coming up with a fairly quick solution. I'm going to apply this material somewhat thick, because what I would like to do, what you want to do is you want to ideally get this covered in one step so we don't have to come back again. So I've applied a fair amount of it. Now I'm going to have to float it up. This is a wider knife. I think it's a 4 or 5 inch. And this idea with this thing is we want to float it out. I'm going to apply more pressure to this edge. I'm going to kind of float this edge off of the sheetrock, have contact on this edge, and the idea is that I depress it and I feather this out so you don't see a line, kind of like this. All right, now we're going to reverse it. We'll put the pressure on this end. And then I kind of very comfortably, very softly float over the top of it. And that's not too bad. You can kind of see the tape, the fibers, pattern coming out here. And if I put some more on there, I know I'm going to mess it up, so it's better. This is fairly thin. It should dry fairly quick. They do make joint compound that dries very quick. It's more expensive, and if you don't use it all up, it tends to dry in your pan and then you've lost all of it. Okay, these anchors are a little bit trickier to take out. You can't unscrew them. What we are going to do is we're going to screw this into the anchor and try to pull it out. I'm going to get a hammer. Here's my hammer. Now when you do this, you have to be very careful. When you put your hammer here, you don't want to put another hole in the sheetrock. So here we're doing is we're pulling out the anchor, and it will kind of jack up the wall a little bit. Nothing more than just sort of pounding it back in. We got another one. We have another one here. Let's go ahead and do.
Screw the screw into the anchor. Now we'll pull out the hands because their pliers pretty much the same.
Put the hammer and pull it out. There it is. Not too bad. Now this hole is probably a little bit bigger than I like, and I think we should put a piece of that fiber tape on here and float over it also. Here are a couple more examples of where to use this fiber tape. There's a piece of paint peeled off, and there's multiple holes. This hole is a little bit too big. It's better just to do this one time. And you know, the real reason why we fuss with all of this stuff is there's about 3 reasons. Okay, one of the reasons, it makes the property look better. Number 2, if we take care of this little maintenance stuff when we have a tenant turnover, well, the property tends to look less beat, tends to look a little bit fresher for the next group. And the third real good reason is if you keep up with all of these holes, you'll be able to tell if the new tenant has put in an inordinate amount of new holes. Because what will happen if they come to a property and they see holes here, holes everywhere on the walls, they're going to put in a whole bunch of holes, and you're not going to know, well, was it the tenant before them or was it these guys? So this way it actually helps you to control it. And also on the other side of it too, it is part of, you can't charge a tenant for every hole, but when you have excessive amounts of holes, like the large holes that we see with those anchors, you can charge them to do those repairs. But some of the small little pinholes, and one picture, for example, in this wall, that's the landlord's responsibility. If the tenant ends up putting multiple holes on one small area, that's excessive, and then you can charge them. Otherwise, you'll find yourself in court an awful lot. So again, we put tape on this section. We've got a piece of fiber tape on here, and we're just going to float this out and let it dry. This is not complete. Once it's dry, we're going to have to put some spray texture on, and then we're going to paint it. Now, this is going to be another example. These are 2 holes, and you know, they're borderline. If you tape it, you have to do 2 or 3 coats, typically 2 coats. You can fill this, and when you rub it out, when you take your cloth, you avoid washing out the hole. And so I leave the mud in the hole, and I wash all around. Now when I rub it, I know the hole is here, and so I just rub around the hole. Look at, there will be a little variation right there where the hole is. But you know what? It's so small, it's still not going to be noticeable. This one's a little bit different because it is missing a piece of the paint. I can still very meticulously kind of go around it. And I think for this one, just because it's missing the paint off of the sheetrock, I'm probably going to go ahead and spray some texture on it. These are other holes. I'll probably just float over top of these one more time, and then let's go ahead and fill. If you must sand, and let's say that you don't like the texture that you see here, use a sponge or water. Don't sandpaper. Don't sand it with sandpaper. If you take this, I'm being careful. I'm just applying pressure along this edge. I'm not trying to wipe out everything else. So what I'm trying to do is feather this out. Maybe I didn't get it quite the way I wanted. But you can take a rag, a sponge, and I'm just kind of concentrating on the edges, leaving the body of this thing alone. And what I'm doing is I'm feathering it out and I'm avoiding the sanding. And so that's about ready. Now I also like this because while it's still wet, I like to spray the texture on a surface that's... Here's a can of spray texture. Simple enough to use. Shake it up real well. And if you look at the top, on the very top it says heavy. If you adjust this thing, and this side of the valve, I don't know if you can read it, but it says fine. So my recommendation is much easier to keep applying more than it is to try to take it off. If you've got a really ugly texture and it's super thick, you may try the heavy side, which is rotating this thing the other direction. But I'm going to set it at fine, and I'm keeping this distance away. I'm moving fairly quick. I like to do short little blasts. It tends to help me have a little bit more control. You can even go in the opposite direction. I do say that I do find that if you start applying too much, it gets a little bit funny looking. So you'll have to play with a little bit. I do find that moving quicker and quick short bursts versus just pressing the button and going nuts on it. Let's do another one. We can see that this is still wet, and I don't know, I am about maybe 6-8 inches away from the project. And that's it. This isn't water-based material, so you could, if you got into trouble with it, wipe it off, but who wants to do that? So even in this little spot here, there's a little bit of mud. I'm going to go ahead and just spray a little bit of texture. It tends to cover it up. Let's do a couple more. You notice that was pretty quick. So we are not having to spend a whole lot of time on this. And I'll be honest, when this stuff dries, it dries quicker, and it tends to take the moisture out of the material, and so it tends to dry it also faster. Bingo, that's good enough. I'm changing the direction, feathering it out. Now here's an application. When you spray this, you're going to get this texture all over this molding. So what I would do, I can't do it with the camera in my hand, but I would take a piece of cardboard. I'll go ahead and I'll demonstrate it. And you would hold the cardboard over this area and protect it, and then just spray around it. You need 2 hands, so I'm not going to be able to do that today. But I will show you what I mean. I'm constantly shaking the can from one patch to the next. This might show a little bit better. That's not too bad. Let's go back to this one. Maybe I want to increase the area and just feather it out a little bit more so that I make a better transition from the new texture to the original texture. While things are still somewhat dry, this is just a powder. You can't take that rag and go ahead and wash this now like this before it dries, you see, so you have less cleanup to do. So here it is. I don't want to get the texture on this because I don't want to increase the amount of work I have to do. So I would just take a piece of cardboard, hold it in my hand, cover up the trim, and then I would spray it. I would spray this area first, and then I would reverse this thing, and I would spray this area second. If I got a little bit of overspray here, I would take my wet rag and wash it off immediately so that I don't have any type of cleanup.